And more on the top sports story of the day so far. Team USA basketball winning by 10, but it was not that easy. They were down 5 at the half. They trailed with 9 minutes left to go in this game against Australia. But a big fourth quarter from Carmelo Anthony and Kyrie Irving, allowing the United States to win by 10 points. Unbeaten streak, the 71 in a row dating back to 2006. We're going to go out to Rio now. Michael Eaves joining us on the phone, fellow Sports Center anchor. Michael was in attendance for that game, but joining us now from just outside the arena. Michael, I got to ask you, what was the tension like in there when everyone found out that this was going to be a game?
You know, you could sense, I don't want to use the word panic. I mean, maybe overstating it, but there was an anxiety on behalf of the USA squad when they realized that this was not going to be a blowout and this was going to be a game that they were going to have to fight tooth and nail to squeak out the W. They started doing some things uncharacteristically in terms of what we've seen so far through the first couple of games. You know, and really the defense, Chris, is where you have to start. In the first two games against China and Venezuela, suffocating is the word you would use for their defense, and it just didn't click tonight. Coach K started a different lineup. Not sure if that had anything to do with the team being out of sync. So I spoke to Tom Thibodeau just moments ago, and he handles the defense for Mike Krzyzewski with Team USA, and he said two things happened. One, they had bad floor balance on transition D, leading to some very easy buckets for Australia. But he also said even the half-court sets, they didn't do a good job of switching their screens, and that caught them as well, gave Australia a lot of open shots. And you go look at the stats, Australia shot better than 50% from the floor, and that's why they were able to keep this game as close as they did for so long.
Bottom line is, though, they won the game. They still won by 10, lowest margin of victory in 4 years, but they still have that streak going, that 10-year streak that's now at 71 games. Now, they trailed for a lot of this game, so what in your mind was the turning point of this game?
Oh, it was definitely Carmelo in the fourth quarter. He had a string there where he hit 4 threes in a row. Kyrie Irving also had a couple buckets in that fourth quarter. I mean, Carmelo was the guy from the very beginning. He had 14 points in the first quarter, and he finished with more than 30 tonight. He was the guy that they needed a bucket the most. He was able to provide it. Now, I will say this. Matthew Dellavedova, you know, Australia, they got a lot of guys on that team that are NBA players, so there was no intimidation factor. And we have to give some credit to Australia. Tom Thibodeau said it, Paul George said it just moments ago as well. These guys have been playing well. They looked very impressive in their first two games prior to playing Team USA tonight. So sometimes you do have to give credit to the other team. But they were trying to spin it, the Team USA was, Chris, just moments ago, saying that, you know, we needed a challenge like this to remind ourselves that we have to play top-notch if we want to beat the teams that we want to face on their way to the gold medal. So, yeah, as you said, they did get the win. It wasn't the way they wanted it to be. It wasn't the way a lot of people expected it, but they got the win and they move on.
Yeah, maybe best-case scenario for Coach K, because now he has something to point to and say, see, this is what happens when we don't play together. Michael Eaves there in Rio de Janeiro, just outside the stadium where the United States squeaked one out against Australia, a team that had 4 NBA champions on its roster. Aaron Baines, Andrew Bogut, Matthew Dellavedova, and Patty Mills. Kyrie Irving was huge, but the biggest player for the United States, a player who has yet to win a championship ring, Carmelo Anthony, who became Team USA's all-time leading Olympic scorer. Driving into work today, it was fitting that when I arrived here in Bristol on campus that the skies were overcast and rain was coming down, because it truly is a dark day at ESPN, because one of the men who helped shape this network and the lives and careers of those who work here is gone. John Saunders died this morning at the age of 61. He worked here for 30 years, all of them with Bob Lee and Chris Berman.
Trying to make sense out of something you really can't make sense out of. I think the most important thing, Chris, is that people understand that the guy they saw at home was the guy we grew to know and love. I mean, you can't fool the camera, but the generosity, the approachability, all of those characters, that was him. And through the 30 years that you and I knew and worked with him.
You know, 30 years is a long yet a short time with John, because I think you agree, Bob, that you met him for a minute, 2 minutes in 1986 or 87 or 88, and that's the same that he was 30 years later. I think that what stands out to me about John, and I think you'll agree with this, and maybe it's partly because he's Canadian, and proudly so.
Absolutely.
There was a lot of old world to him, if I might say that.
Courtly,
but I mean that in a proper also sounds that's too heavy a word, but when it comes to interpersonal relationships or looking at somebody one-on-one, stranger or someone he's known like you and me for 30 years, old world is still the way to go.
Yeah.
And that's what I thought of with John. He was proper and old world, yet welcoming at the same time, because old world and proper can be, don't get too close. Not the case.
You always knew, whether it was at a restaurant, a bar, shockingly, after
Canadian.
a game, Canadian,
Right?
hey, having a
Canadian.
moment. We'll talk about that. Or the newsroom. You always knew John was there. That laughter. I never had a bad day.
Right.
Always, you felt better being around him. I mean, he came in 1986 and working with me on college basketball, and he and I kind of divvied up the working with Dick Vitale, which is an experience, and of course, I just think of what it meant for John to, in that short time working with Jim Valvano, develop that friendship in Jimmy's last years that became such a motivating factor in John's life, because the V Foundation was such a motivating portion of his life all these years later. I mean, he's identified with that. He's such a visible portion of it. And that's, he's mentored so many people here. I'm sure we've heard other people talk about that. And that's just the giving nature. He was truly a giver.
Well, in the same way, and John had his physical problems. You never heard him complain about it. One was not cancer, but yet that he took because of his friend, because of his loyalty to better say it, loyalty to a friend who passed, loyalty to people he didn't have to know for 10, 20 years. He was a bonder. And I think everyone, and I think it's important as those folks watch at home, this is the only reason I'm pointing here now, is that if you didn't feel comfortable with John in a minute, you're just not comfortable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're right.
He's just easy.
You talked about him being Canadian, and when I sat down to write the tribute for him that we've been running through the day, thank you. And it affirmed, I felt good that in hearing Jesse Palmer, Barry Melrose talk, the three things that matter, and I think we touched on it, but their family certainly, first and foremost. But hockey, he loved it. And I talked to people today who played against him here in some pickup games, and man, he had elbows, and you knew when he took you into the boards. Thank God I didn't skate against him. I couldn't skate. But and being Canadian, his pride, he was so proud to. For example, the first year the Raptors came into existence in 1995, and he was calling those games on a freelance basis, and that meant a lot to him. His nation was stepping into the NBA, and there he was. And we, I'd call him a hoser, he'd call you a Yank, and back and forth on that stuff.
You couldn't say enough with him. He'd get the same chuckle. I mean, it's not like that's the greatest punchline ever,
no.
but he look, Bobby, I think that professionally, and this is the way he was personally too, he was very comfortable being, let me say this right, the supporting actor. Yet here's a host of many shows. The Sports Reporters, of course, jumps right out, but many others. But he was fine not being the limelight. Matter of fact, more comfortable, but yet, someone's got to take control. No, he did it, but didn't.
It's a subtle skill.
It's great.
And it's not an easy skill. And, the breadth of what he did in this industry, and he made it look so easy. Hosting live wraparound programs on college basketball, play-by-play, all the different sports. And we were just chatting earlier with Mike McQuaid, who goes back as far as you and I do with John. His 6 degrees of separation in this industry are astonishing when you look at the breadth of sports that he worked. I mean, if you were just to take a Rolodex of everybody in sports television or the sports industry, you'd reach in there and pull out a card. Chances are John knew them, worked with them, and are friends with them simply because he did so many things, and he did them all well, and he made it, and this is the important part, he made it look easy.
He did, because
that's a damn hard thing to do.
But I would never describe him as smooth, because that seems like that's thought out.
Yeah, right.
you know? You're right, he did. We just thought of that with Mike, that every sport, and of course, sports reporters covered every sport, whether it's Olympic judo to the National Football League. It doesn't really matter.
And corralling all those guys on a Sunday
well, that's
morning
a
with
whole
those.
other story.
Yeah,
that early in the morning, you don't have your manners about you
exactly.
most of the time.
You need your caffeine.
I think John would be honored to be remembered fondly, but I don't think that's what he was about at all. And, you know, here, if he was sitting here, you know, I would say onward, and I spell that with a U and a boot. I would say it that way, but I'm not trying to be funny.
Right.
He would, he was never about that. He'd come in every room and he'd kind of slip in, but you knew he was there immediately.
Yep.
The laugh, it wasn't this bellowing, knock you out of the room laugh, but it was.
You heard it, you knew it was his, right? Yeah. You know,
I'll miss that.
Yeah.
Darn it. I just.
How to remember him? A hell of a broadcaster, certainly, but the guy who, when you sit, you talk, you know, you pull out your phone, latest pictures of your kids, you trade those stories. Who you'd hear from other people, not from John, about the good things he had done, mentoring people, helping out, his visibility with the V Foundation. So, and he leaves us, as you well know, Boomer, horrible, cosmic coincidence. 20 years to the week since we lost Tom Mees. There's something about this month of August. But remembering a good man who left us too soon, as I said, and
we
have a good thought for Wanda and the girls.
Yes, we should have started with that, with Wanda and Aaliyah and Jenna. We love you very much. Bernie, your brother, and your extended family, which includes us here at ESPN, and as it turns out, includes at least two nations, America and Canada.
John P. Saunders.
John.
Go with God, my friend.
We love you. We're fortunate to know you.
Those are two guys that worked with him for all 30 years that John Saunders was here. Bob Lee and Chris Berman, the Saunders family, releasing the following statement. This tragic news brings us unspeakable sorrow. John was the patriarch of our family, and we can't believe he's gone. We are sincerely touched by the outpouring of support and sadness, which is a reflection of the character and integrity that defined him. While we don't yet have all the specifics, John wasn't feeling well physically in recent days, and sadly, he was unresponsive earlier this morning. We appreciate all of the thoughts and prayers for our cherished father, husband, brother, and uncle. Saunders is survived by his wife, Wanda, and his two daughters, Aaliyah and Jenna.